What is your sex ed horror story? 6th grade sex ed. At the end of the class, the teacher opened the floor for questions. She said we could ask anything as long as it was a serious question. The only question I remember was when a kid, male, asked, "It's okay to bang with your sister, right?" The teacher stared at him for what felt like a minute and said, "No."
We now have a Discord. Check out the server in the link in the description.
Story 2. 9th grade health class with Mr. Lamb. Dude was an absolute gem of a human, but his voice sounded exactly like Barry White, like all the time. So anytime he tried to say anything remotely intimate, it sounded like the voiceover for a raunchy R&B song, which made the freshmen erupt in laughter, constantly. Poor guy just couldn't get through a lesson for 3 weeks straight. Story 3. The only thing I remember from sex ed, which was taught by the creepy lunch lady. Lunch lady unrolls a rubber and stretches it as far as she could. Then she says,
"I know none of you are this big, so this will fit any of you."
Edit. I get it, most of you on Reddit have above average units. There is an appropriately sized raincoat for you too. No, one size does not fit all, find the one that fits you. They exist. This was a co-ed class of around 200. I have no idea why the lunch lady was teaching this. She didn't teach anything else. The responses were pretty much the same as what you see in this thread. The room erupted and nobody really listened to anything else she said. Honestly, guys, I could not think of a voice for a lunch lady. I just couldn't. So, I'm sorry, I've let you all down. Definitely a weird thing for the lunch lady to say, and it's also weird for her to be teaching sex ed. Just strange all around. Story 4. My health teacher stuck her foot in an XL rubber and pulled it halfway up her shin and then stared at the class. She said, "If a guy ever tells any of you he's too big for rubbers, you run as fast and as far away as you can." Story 5. Unintentional sex ed happened for me in 4th grade. In an assignment, we had to invent a new town relating to the gold rush. I named it Corn, but with a P. And I thought I just made a new word. Did not know what adult content was at all. My imagination sucks, and the town name was similar to a name I had recently heard, Cape Horn. We had to give a reason for the name, and my unimaginative mind said they didn't know why. A teacher-parent conference later, I was confused why they were asking me about the word corn with a P, and if I knew what it meant. Zero explanation on their end. So curiosity hits me, and I Google it. That's how my 4th grade teacher introduced me to online adult content and pleasuring myself. Wow, it's almost like trying to hide these things from kids had the opposite consequence. Isn't that crazy? How did they know nothing about this dealing with kids all day long? If you tell a kid to not say a word, they will immediately use it whenever they can. That's just how kids' brains work. Everyone involved in that meeting with OP absolutely screwed the pooch. Story 6. My health teacher in high school told us, "Rubbers are strong and they are very stretchy. Don't believe any guy who goes, 'I'm too big, I won't fit all this,' or 'it's just gonna break anyway, why bother putting one on?'" She then produced 3 rubbers available for pickup in the health office, proceeded to pull one over her hand and up past her elbow on her arm like it was a fancy costume glove, and spread her fingers out as wide as they can go, and then stretched the 2 remaining of said rubbers over her cowboy boots, and walked around non-stop for over 6 hours before one of them broke. Not necessarily a horror story, but that will haunt my dreams forever. Story 7. Story from my mom. She taught a middle school special ed class. Her and a male colleague handled sex ed. Her first year on the job, they passed around a box so that teachers could write questions anonymously. The male teacher pulled a question and said he couldn't answer. Mom, wanting to be helpful, asked if it was a female question. The male teacher tried to warn her. The question was, what does nut taste like? My mom was so dedicated to educating these kids that she launched a hypothetical discussion about how most bodily fluids have a high salt content, so it might taste salty. The boy who wrote the question could not contain himself and blurted out, "My girlfriend said it tastes like gummy bears." My mother never ate a gummy bear again. Story 8. Being singled out by the teacher because I had a unique name for a scenario along with a boy who I didn't like. She used our names in a scenario talking about how a relationship develops. We had to stand in front of class while she described random scenarios where we might end up having unprotected banging, and why it was bad. I was not attracted to this boy, and I'm sure he wasn't attracted to me either. Hearing her talk about us banging was nightmarish. Let me just say, this is incredibly poor practice from the teacher. You do not know your student's comfortability level with that kind of stuff. It's just really, honestly disrespectful to pull 2 people up there, single them out in front of a whole class of kids, no less, and then talk about frisky, intimate stuff for like the first time. That's super screwed up. That being said, if I were there watching that, yeah, it would be hilarious. I'm sorry, OP. It would be really funny. Story 9. Not really a horror story, but in high school sex ed, our teacher had a big section on rubbers, which culminated with the class betting on how stretchy they were to prove that no one should accept the "I'm too big for them" excuse. Well, one air pump and one rubber later, we had our answer at about the size of a long watermelon. As our teacher was going to try to pop it to prove they're tough, our principal was doing his rounds and opened the door. He saw our teacher smacking the crap out of an inflated rubber and just backed away slowly. I found it hilarious. Story 10. Well, I don't think it was a horror story, but it stunned a few people. When I was 5 and my sister was 6, we had a fish tank. One of the fish we had was pregnant, and we liked it quite a bit. Unfortunately, she died before giving birth, so my sister, curious creature she is, asked our aunt, a trauma nurse who worked on Life Flight with a passion for teaching, if we could cut the fish open and save the babies. This would eventually lead first to my aunt dissecting the fish for us, then to her explaining reproduction, and ending with a rudimentary version of the talk. My aunt would take every chance she got to have a very graphic and factual discussion about banging and reproduction, so we would always be armed with knowledge and never have anything unknown. But in hindsight, it was a bizarre way to get educated on the birds and the bees. Edit. To answer the burning question, no, the fish babies didn't make it. I have a very vivid memory of the little babies spilling out on the paper towel. Not a bad memory because it didn't freak me out, just kind of made me more curious about the world, I guess. So glad to hear how many nurses out there are similarly educating kids. Edit 2. We had mollies, and mollies give live birth. Not all fish lay eggs. People that keep fish tanks can confirm all you gotta do is blink in a tank with live-bearing fish, and you've got pregnant ones. Story 11. We played STD in a cup. Everyone gets a cup of water. One cup of water has a bunch of dissolved starch in it, the STD. We went around swapping fluids to represent banging, and we're supposed to see if we could safely avoid STDs without protection. At the end, we found out who had it by dropping iodine into each cup, turning the starch blue. If it turned blue, you tested positive. Everyone in the class ended up with the STD, even me, because even though I only had one partner, and they had one before me, the one before them was an absolute harlot, and had everybody's fluids. Honestly, a very good exercise and warning, except for that one kid. At the end, he dumped his test results and refilled his cup at the bubbler in order to claim he didn't have it, and he was good for more fluid swapping. Honestly, another good lesson on jerks who will lie about being clean. Use protection, kids. Story 12. Probably 9 or 10 years old, mid-80s. Sex ed was taught at an after-school event that lasted about a week. My mom and I and my best friend and her mom went. There were 2 rooms, girls and their moms in one room, and boys and their dads in the next. We learned basic stuff mostly about anatomy. Slides were shown, probably dating from the 50s. Awkward. Then at one point, the male teacher came over and asked for a few of the moms to come next door to help with something. My imagination went wild, especially since my mom went with the man. I thought for sure that she and the other mom who went were being forced to show a live demo of what their breasts looked like. Or worse. Even though I didn't know what worse was yet. They were in there for what seemed like forever. What were they doing to our moms? How is my mom going to explain this to my dad when we get home? Why is nobody alarmed? Because they were moving desks. Now that is a proper horror story. The mind of a child in that environment certainly would run wild. I know mine would. Mine as a child, I mean, not now, I don't think. Story 13. Sex ed, junior year of high school. One of the days I was sick, like really sick. So instead of going to class, I went to the nurse because I felt like I was gonna puke. Nurse told me that I had to get a pass from the teacher of the class I'm about to go to and come back, which was stupid. So I was like, screw that, nurse. I'll just go to class if they won't help me feel better. So I'm in class, and of course it's the day of the STD slideshow, where they show us the most extreme untreated pictures of STDs to try and scare us into not wanting to bang. Surprised they were even allowed to show them in our conservative community. So there I sit, crammed in with a bunch of other students, since they combined 2 health classes at once for this. I'm nowhere near the door, and I feel it. I am going to puke. Crap. I don't want to puke in front of everyone, especially during the STD slideshow. I try to power through it. Nope, not working. I let out a series of super loud retches, but to my surprise, I don't actually puke. I did it. Now I'm merely the kid who dry heaved during the slideshow, not the one who puked all over the floor. Still was embarrassing as hell, though. Story 14. My sex ed was a series of books on cassette tapes from some Christian organization my dad made me listen to in the car with him one awkward summer day. Suffice to say, my actual sexual education came courtesy of one insanely understanding young lady from the Craigslist dating section. Our first night together, she just said, "Wow, you really have no idea what's up, do you?" And then proceeded to walk me through stuff for like a few hours. Honestly, hats off to that woman, because there's no way I was good at anything. But she invited me over a few more times after that, and even though we never so much as dated, I still regard her with a massively fond respect. I personally don't understand why these super conservative religious communities just don't teach anyone about it. Like, you can teach your kids about it and then still discourage it if that's what you want to do. I mean, I don't personally agree with that, but you still could. Instead, you tell them nothing about it so they get more curious about it. It's just such backwards way of thinking. Or just no way of thinking, really. So people just go out into the world completely uninformed about the most central aspect of human existence. Wonderful. Great work, everybody. Story 15. 5th grade. They separated the boys and girls into 2 classrooms. They must have thought the boys were too young to need any sex ed, late 80s. So we were read a short story, Ray Bradbury's A Sound of Thunder, where they go back in time to unalive a dinosaur. In the classroom with the girls, they papered over all the windows and had a teacher standing guard outside. The girls must have gotten the straight truth from our cranky female teacher about how they were all about to have their periods, get breasts, grow pubes, need deodorant for body odor, everything. This was probably the first time many had heard of some of this stuff, because when the boys came back into the room, all the girls were shell-shocked, some were crying. I asked the girl who sat next to me, "What story did your class read?" Story 16. The embarrassing story of how I learned what a rubber was. When I was about 8 years old, I was at home bored one day. I decided to take a look at this pocket knife my parents had bought as a thank you gift for one of the people at the after-school program I was at. I opened up the tools one by one to check them out, and when I got to the knife, I wasn't paying attention and ended up closing it on my thumb. At first, I thought it was nothing, but then blood started pouring out, and I realized it was a bad cut and started to panic. I ran over to the bathroom and started screaming for my dad, who was working outside on the car. I ran water over my thumb and the blood just kept coming and coming. Eventually, my dad came, calmed me down, and had me put pressure on it. It was a pretty deep cut, but he didn't think I needed to go to the hospital. By the time my mom got back, everything was okay and I was just a little shaken. She bandaged me up really well and then went to Walgreens for something. When she came back, she had a box of finger cots, which I had never seen before. She put one on my thumb and told me it would help me heal faster by keeping the bandage in place. She had me wear it to school the next day, and I was ready to tell my classmates how crazy the cut was and how badly I was bleeding, thinking that they would find it cool. I was young and had no idea what a rubber even was or what it was used for, so I was very naive. However, the kids that liked to bully me weren't, and as soon as they saw my thumb, they screamed out, "Edgar's got a rubber on his finger!" Either everyone but me knew what a rubber was, or people were just going along with it, because the entire class started laughing at me. I was so embarrassed. I ran to the bathroom crying and ripped off the finger cot. When I got home that night, I asked my mom why she would do that, and her excuse was that she didn't think anyone would even know what a rubber was, and it was going to help me heal faster. She didn't make me wear it to school again, but the damage was already done, and I was made fun of for that for a while. Story 17. I think it was 8th grade sex ed. It wasn't great as a whole, but they had a guest speaker come in one day from a place they'd been using for years. She comes in and ends up talking about how you shouldn't bang before marriage. What if you have a kid and the relationship doesn't last? How is your future spouse going to feel about you having a kid with someone else? How can you do that to the person you're going to marry for the rest of your life? I started absolutely bawling when the class ended. I tried holding it in, but I couldn't. All I could think of was how terrible I was for being that kid. Other kids in my class were livid for me and stood up to the lady. Told my mom after school, and she immediately called them. Mad as hell. The teacher himself called to apologize the next day and said that the lady would not be coming back, and they wouldn't be going back to the company either. I'm a little confused here. What is OP implying? That they had already banged, or that they got singled out by the teacher? Because whatever it was, it must have been pretty bad, because the other kids stood up for them, and kids don't stand up for each other very often. If you understand it, let me know in the comments. I do read every single one of them, I promise. Story 18. I was filling in for the 9th grade life skills teacher while she was at an appointment, and she left a chart for the kids to fill in with the different birth control methods, / their percent effectiveness, / any side effects. I'm at the front of the room leading the discussion with the info they need to fill in their charts. The last method on the chart was abstinence. I said, there are no side effects. One of the freshman boys raised his hand and said, I know a side effect of abstinence. Carpal tunnel. I couldn't even pretend that it was inappropriate. I laughed as hard as the kids did. That kid is a comic genius. That's a top-tier joke coming out of a 9th grader's mouth. All right, go off, kid. Story 19. We did a thing in 9th grade where anyone could write down a question anonymously. One was about average dong size. This was in the early 90s, so that wasn't something we could just Google. The sex ed teacher, who was highly trained at coaching football, but probably not sex ed, told us, Between 7 and 9 inches. Probably every guy nervously glanced around the room and tried to put on their best, sure, that sounds right, face. I was convinced for about a year that I had a microdong. Google has saved so many kids' self-esteems. Doing God's work, Google. You really are. Story 20. I grew up in the American South, where banging was such a taboo that the class wasn't allowed to be called sex ed. We had to call it your adult body. The class was completely about puberty and childbirth, because any mention of banging was deemed too upsetting for young people. We learned that rubbers and birth control were a thing and the general idea of how they might work, but nothing else. We were never taught how to use a rubber, or how to get birth control, or how to know what an STD might look like. It wasn't surprising when we had a really high pregnancy rate in our school. I guess the true horror was being left unprepared. When I got to college, I fell in love and banged for the first time. Due to being taught that anyone who bangs is dirty and less of a person, I had a lot of anxiety and felt like I would be abandoned. Sex ed should never be abstinence-only education. Story 21. I was in health class and there was this kid named Jordan. Now, Jordan was dumb as hell. Our gym teacher taught our sex ed class. He was a kind of no BS guy, and he dealt with his fair share of garbage from Jordan. He does the classic, "there are no stupid questions here" spiel. Well, Jordan, after hearing this, raises his hand with full enthusiasm. He goes,
Mr. G, sometimes if I squeeze my nipples really hard, really hard, a tiny drop of milk will come out. Is that normal?
Our gym teacher just sort of looked at him in disbelief, but Jordan was full on serious. Our gym teacher goes, "You know when I said there are no stupid questions? Well, I was wrong. Stop squeezing your nips, Jordan." Story 22. It's 7th grade. I had just learned about ancient stone adult toys from thousands of years ago from the internet. In a desperate, foolish attempt at making friends, I raised my hand. The teacher called on me. I entered into a long speech about the discovery of ancient adult toys, specifically a smooth, carved stone dong discovered in a cave. I said how old it was, and I explained what ancient people used for rubbers, animal intestines. I ended my speech and specifically remember thinking to myself, yes, today's the day other kids think my knowledge is cool and funny and I'll make a friend. The majority of the class laughed hysterically at me. One boy yelled at me that I was disgusting and stupid. Girls don't know about that kind of stuff. The teacher scolded him and told the rest of the class to quiet down. I sat down in my chair, hunched over and humiliated. People stared at me weird the rest of the class period, and I cried on the way home. And that's the day I learned that maybe not everyone likes the same kinds of things that I do. OP, if it makes you feel any better, I guarantee there was at least one kid who was like, "Oh, that's really interesting," or one person who was like, "Oh, that's really cool." But they were just all wrapped up in the grade 7 hive mind. It's not your fault. 'Cause that is interesting, and I guarantee that people back then thought it too. But all it takes is one cool kid in the class to be like, that's so stupid, you're so gross, and everyone will be like, haha, yeah, so true. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, everybody. I hope this was educational, kind of fun. I'll catch you in the next one.